Hey, Pat McCardle back for another episode of Shop Talk, where today I've got my buddy Dane in from Fox. We're going to be talking all about RZR suspension technology. Stay tuned for more. So I think maybe for everybody's knowledge, maybe let's give them a little history of how long we've been working together, right? And I mean, it's been at least 15 years that I can remember.
Yeah, so well over a decade that Fox and Polaris have been partnering on OE suspension manufacturing. Fox has been in the game for well over 50 years. So we've been 50 years of pushing potential further. So like whatever's in your shop, whatever's in your garage, we've made shocks for it. So V-twin motorcycles, trucks, UTVs, ATVs, we've got it. And then within that, yeah, well over a decade between Fox and Polaris. And then with live valve, almost nearly a decade.
Yeah, I think almost a decade in production, and certainly when you count development, it's been longer than that.
Yep.
I think when we first started working with you guys, you know, a lot of the shocks that we got were getting built out of California facilities, but that's not true today, right?
Yeah, so a lot of different Fox manufacturing locations. So Fox was born and bred in Scotts Valley, California, so that's Northern California. And for a long time, all of the UTV, our power sports shocks, were made in Watsonville, so right there on the coast. Now, as we have pushed the potential further, our global headquarters is just outside Atlanta, Georgia, and a massive facility, many hundreds of thousands of square feet, producing all things OE for on-road, truck, and for power sports, and so that's done there. Testing and development all over the place, so we've got engineers in that Scotts Valley facility still. We have a massive test facility down in the desert Southwest, really close to the Mexico border, all over.
Nice. And when I think, when you think about the whole Polaris footprint, right? Snowmobile shocks, right? RZR shocks, Polaris Expedition, Indian motorcycle.
Correct.
Right? All of those are, you've got some footprint in with us, on the OEM side.
Exactly. A lot of that technology carries over. So what's unique about Fox is all of the DNA goes through both the aftermarket and the OE. So you get the aluminum bodied shocks, you get the adjustability, you get all of that, whether it comes turnkey on this vehicle or you want to upfit a vehicle yourself later on down the road. But as you said, V-twin in the Indian space, utility adventure in the Expedition space, desert just gnarliness here in the RZR and the Pro R space, but that heritage goes all the way through, and it's a big part of your catalog.
Yeah, so I think one thing we want to dive into a little deeper today, and maybe we'll walk back and kind of start with the Pro XP we've got here, right? Is that from the Fox side, we get the live valve shock itself, right? Which is a little bit different than a passive shock in that it takes the clicker out, right, and puts an electronic solenoid in its place. Which I think gives a couple huge benefits, right? Number one is that it can react way faster than you getting out and having to turn that clicker, right? Yep. The other thing is that we actually get a broader dynamic range of adjustment, right? So that shock can actually get softer on the soft side and firmer on the top. So instead of being a window like this, it actually opens it up to be even more. And when you think about, when you couple that live valve technology with the Dynamics active controls that Polaris has got, right on the steering wheel, you've got the ability to adjust the mode. On this Pro XP, that's kind of a comfort, sport, and firm, so it's a little maybe simpler, not quite mode specific, if you will. And then we've got that red button that if you push and hold, it'll lock it on to the most firm setting. Or new for model year 25, if you double tap on that red button, it'll actually lock it into that until you double tap it again. Now, if we walk over to the Pro R that we've got sitting in the shop, this one's a bit different, right?
Yeah.
So still has a live valve technology shock on it, but what's different on this one than what we've got on the Pro XP?
So as you said, we've got what's a semi-active shock, which is what both of these are, and a passive shock. So passive is analog, acoustic. This is electric, ready to go. So instead of getting out and having to reach in here and click those adjusters manually or get out and do that with a wrench, this has got a single valve, live valve. So this is just monitoring compression and changing that, and this is dual. So this is going to be rebound and compression. So as you said, with that semi-active shock, that tunable window is fluctuating almost instantaneously. Yep. So whereas a passive vehicle that has no electronic adjustment there, I have to set a tune to my shocks, and I have to decide if that's how fast I want to be going or that's how comfortable I want to be in the vehicle. So you and I may have very different driving styles, and if I have a very stiff setup on my suspension, it's meant because I'm driving a little bit faster. It may not be what you're looking for. What's great about live valve is it's instantaneously taking a predictive measurement of all of the things the vehicle is doing. So driver inputs from the throttle, steering wheel, the inputs of where the vehicle is in space, and it's predicting what the next move's going to be faster than you can get out, unbuckle, make an adjustment, get back in the vehicle. So this is a single valve in the sense that it's just doing compression, and this is dual valve DV for rebound and compression. And this is, first time we saw dual valve was 2021 for this on the Pro R and the Turbo R chassis.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you think about, you know, as a driver, you know, or even a passenger, the real benefit of this dynamics technology with Fox live valve setup is that you can, you know, 200 times a second, we're adjusting what that compression and rebound is like. Now on the Pro R, you also get different drive modes. And we did an episode, you know, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago. You guys can click back and we'll go into all the details of what that control system is doing. But the beauty is that if you're tooling around, going in and out to camp, you know, maybe you're in comfort, just cruising around. Then when you all of a sudden you get into a whooped out section, maybe you tap that thing up to Baja and you can just rail right through it. And you know, you get that comfort level, you get that confidence level, and it also helps actually keep the tire on the ground better.
That's the biggest part, is with confidence comes control, and with control comes comfort. So the more time that your tires are no longer contacting the ground, you have less control. So suspension is just as necessary when you're in the air as you are on the ground. So as long as that tire's on the ground, you're able to have your proper steering, everything like that. So as you said, there's 4 settings within this. You've got rock, you've got rock, track, comfort, and Baja mode. If you decide to put it into one of those prescribed buckets, so to speak, live valve will always save itself. So if you're in comfort mode and then you decide to pick up the speed a little bit on trail and there is a whoop or a G out, you can press that red button on the steering wheel, or live valve will predict that as it's happening 200 times a second and will increase compression in order to make that more of a sustained hit. And it will actually reduce some of that rebound so that it doesn't spring you out. So live valve, you can put it into 4 desired buckets, and then it will always be predicting your next move based on your throttle input, how you're stabbing at the steering wheel, how fast the vehicle's going, and making sure that it's always ready for what you might be throwing at it.
Yeah, so I think maybe let's show these guys what a shock looks like on the bench, and we've actually got one of the valves pulled apart. So you can see that. Maybe let's talk a little bit about not only how is that good for guys riding on the trail or out in the dunes, but also what that means for race applications.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Dane, we got a few things sitting out on the bench here today in the shop, and I think the first thing we got to do is maybe just pick up a couple of these shocks.
Yeah, by comparison.
I'll take the baby. You can have the big boy here.
Sweet.
But this is roughly the size of like when we came out with the original RZR S900. A 2-inch bodied shock, not huge amounts of stroke. But enough to do the job on a vehicle of that size and that capability, right?
Yep.
Fast forward to today when we're talking like a Pro S or a Pro R, and we've got a way bigger body on this thing, way more stroke, way more capability, right?
Yep.
So when you think about technology inside this, since we don't have this one torn apart, kind of go through, because this is actually an internal bypass shock,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, this is an internal bypass. This is a 3-inch diameter compared to that 2-inch diameter. So like I said previously, is the DNA between all of our shocks, whether it be on-road, whether it be V-twin, whether it be UTV, it's all there. It's going to be an aluminum body shock. It's going to be internal wiper seals, and this has an internal bypass. So when we're looking at what the vehicle, your expectations are out of it, and it's all relative, this is a great trail type of shock that is going to get the job done, but has limitations to when you then want to go do something else. Internal bypass. Fluid cannot be compressed, but a gas can. And when fluid is compressed beyond its limits, it will find the path of least resistance, and that's when you see people blowing shocks and things like that. Inside of this body, of the 3-inch external diameter, there's a 2.5-inch body that's an internal diameter that has ports drilled into it. There's 3 zones within a shock's travel. Right now, we're at fully extended, what we call our top out or our catch zone. This is meant for as the vehicle has been unweighted and the wheels are all the way at their full droop setting. There is a bottom out section here, bottom out at the top, top out at the bottom, external bump stop. But there's 3 zones. This is your catch zone, your ride zone is where it's sitting right now as it's riding, and then your bump zone all the way at the top. Inside there are various ports that are drilled within that body to help that fluid bypass under a very forceful impact. Whether you've left the ground or you've G'd out through something, that's going to allow the shock to have a progressive feel through the entire aspect, regardless of what setting you've put it in, regardless of what type of payload is in the vehicle, it's always going to save itself.
Yeah, and I think one super important thing for people to remember when you think about internal bypass technology, you know, inside, as Dane mentioned, right, inside this tube, there's a tube inside of it with those holes, which allows us to basically tune in that ride zone really plush and be able to make it firmer as that shock compresses and gets further into the stroke. So one of the really key things to remember is that there's also a spring, which you don't see on this particular shock, right? We got a spring perch here that's obviously adjustable. We've got crossover rings that are adjustable, so kind of when you go from the tender to when you go to the mainspring. And if you add a lot of weight to a vehicle, especially one with an internal bypass shock, it is massively important to check your owner's manual and reset that preload to maintain your stock ride height, because that'll keep you in that plush ride zone instead of getting you deeper into that more firm, you know, kind of compressive zone that you get to as that shock is getting squatted down a little bit.
Exactly, because a spring establishes your ride height and maintains your payload. So going and doing a different shock doesn't allow you to carry more. So as you said right there, Pat, is that if I add a spare tire mount on the back of that after the fact, I can micro adjust here. I cannot get a massive amount of lift, but I can micro adjust to get that ride height back, because within that body, there are 3 immovable ports. As the shock shaft is going through its normal stroke at a normal, you know, inches per second, those ports won't open up.
Right.
But as I forcefully hit that and I am sitting lower in my travel and my ride zone is somewhere closer to where my bottom out zone is, that internal port is useless.
Right.
So you're absolutely correct, is you can fine tune your ride height as you add accessories, and those are very key to then going through, and you'll need to adjust valves and spring rates as you add or subtract weight from vehicles.
Yeah, so when we talk valves and spring rates, right? So obviously spring rate, we're talking on the outside of the shock that you don't see here, but it's on the vehicle. When we talk about valve and a valve stack, right? We've got a piston here. This is not actually for this exact shock, but you get the idea. And then we've got a stack of what looks like simple washers, right? But there's nothing simple about these, right? Kind of walk us through when you know, as the teams are tuning these shocks, you know, what are they doing to be able to select the sizes, the thicknesses, the number of these shims that go into this?
Yep. So what's the weight of a Pro R off the top of your head?
Oh man, you're gonna get me on the spot here.
I don't know it, so it's not like I'm gonna catch you with your pants down. So it's like 2,000-ish pounds, but the idea is that the DNA, the what makes this shock setup, it can control the wheel movement and the body movement of a 2,000-pound vehicle or a 10,000-pound vehicle.
Right.
The differentiation inside the shock is what this shim stack does. So again, like you said, here is your main piston. That piston is bolted to the top of this shock shaft. And inside there, the fluid is gonna flow in and out of that piston. Now on top and below that piston is your rebound and your compression stack for these shims. And what differentiates this shock from something that weighs 10 times the weight of this is the orientation and the amount of shims that I have, because these will deflect out of the way on the rebound as it's coming through, and will deflect out of the way on the compression as it's moving up. So the differentiation between shock valving is what you're trying to get the vehicle to do, where you're trying to drive it, and how much the thing weighs.
Yeah, and I think when people think about this, when we talk about these shims moving, right, they're not like bending in half. It's like a little bit of flex to let that oil go through, right?
Exactly.
And then as it goes the other direction, they come back flat to block that oil flow. But with this internal bypass, you actually have the ability with those ports we talked about to flow all the way around that until you go across it and close that section off.
Correct.
Yeah, so the next thing that we've got sitting here is actually a little bit different than a standard mechanical shock, right?
Correct.
And when we think about this live valve technology, we actually have on this particular X2 shock, we've got 2 of these solenoids in it, right?
Yep.
One for compression, one for rebound. But we've got the compression one out in our hand just to be able to show people what this looks like.
Yep.
And effectively what this is doing is taking the place of a normal clicker, right?
Yep. So if you see our manual shocks, which is either going to be something with a DSC, a dual speed compression adjuster, which is high speed and low speed, that adjusts that independently. This is taking the place of that, of also the QS3 being able to do it manually, and 200 times a second, it's opening and closing that and making sure that that fluid's going in. It's doing independently of rebound. So there will be environments as to which I want to have stiffer high-speed compression, and high-speed and low-speed compression. It's not indicative of how fast the vehicle's going all the time. It's how fast the shock is moving. So I could be doing 80 miles an hour down a trail, and I go into a turn and I feel the body start to flop. It's a low shock shaft environment. I could also be going down a trail at 5 miles an hour and hit a rut, and that wheel goes up. So low speed is chassis movements,
Yep.
high speed is wheel movements is the easiest way to look at that. And instead of getting out and manually adjusting and then getting ready for how I anticipate driving, this is instantaneously doing it 200 times a second based on how fast I'm going,
Yep.
how fast the wheels are traveling, throttle input, and it's doing it independently of rebound and compression. I
Yeah,
have to guess.
and I think the cool part when you look at RZRs with dynamics technology on them, when we have ride command as well, we also give people a visualization on the screen that you can actually see what each corner is doing. On the Pro XP, just on the compression side. When you think about the Pro R or Pro S, also on the rebound side, so you can see independently or coupled how those are moving. And it's not that we adjust all 4 corners at the same time.
Nope.
Dynamically, we're adjusting each corner depending on whether you're throttling, braking, cornering, right? Going through whoops. All of those are going to make it so you get the smoothest ride you possibly can for the conditions you're in and the settings that you've chosen. All right, so Dane, we've talked a lot about these shocks, right? And I know, as the Polaris team has stood up a factory racing team, we do leverage this same shock technology on those rigs, right?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit, like what's the same, what's different? How do those get tuned differently for those race machines?
Yeah, so the shock body, the internals, everything in terms of what you see here is identical for that race team. The differentiation is, as I asked you before, like what's the the curb weight of this?
Yep.
They may have a little bit of adjustment because of its more tubes for the cage and whatnot. So your shim stack will be different in that race vehicle based on what that vehicle weighs, but the valves are identical. The way the dynamics is incorporated inside that cockpit is identical. The overall shape, form, look, and feel of this shock, identical from an off the showroom floor Pro R and the Race Pro R.
Yeah, so when you're thinking about shocks, right, like what comes from the factory really is race proven in this condition. I think that's about it for this episode of Shop Talk. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want to see next time.